Hey guys. Tonight we begin with the surprisingly cramped, poorly lit, and oddly aromatic world of ancient Roman prostitution, where a good day might mean no missing teeth and a client who doesn't smell like goat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from across time zones and centuries. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You regain consciousness on what could charitably be described as a sack of straw, that's somehow both too soft and too crunchy, reeking faintly of mildew oil, and something sour that's probably you. There's no pillow, just a rolled-up linen that has absorbed years of other people's dreams, arguments, and tears. The walls of your room are so close, you can touch all four corners without standing up. That's not a metaphor. You're quite literally sleeping in a cell, tucked beneath a tavern or up a staircase that creaks louder than your knees. Welcome to the Lupanar Rome's version of a budget motel and body shop in one. Your room is windowless, the air thick with last night's incense and someone else's regrets. There's a flickering oil lamp on a small wooden stool that serves as your only furniture, though it's currently empty, probably stolen. Again, your possessions, if you can call them that, are shoved into a clay jar, a broken bronze mirror that gives your reflection the look of a ghost mid-sneeze, a stub of face chalk, a cheap comb missing 3 teeth, and a tin of perfume paste that smells aggressively of myrrh and maybe cloves or maybe rats. This space is both your home and your office, your sanctuary and your trap. There are no windows, just a crude curtain for a door, the kind that rustles with every breeze and reminds you that privacy is a modern luxury. In Rome, walls are more like suggestions, and curtains are just false hope. You hear voices already early customers, or maybe just rowdy tavern-goers, debating philosophy over sour wine. You'd prefer the philosophers. They usually pay up front. You stretch, or try to. One arm hits the wall, the other knocks over the comb jar. The straw mattress crackles like it's trying to start a fire. You inhale and immediately regret it. Time to begin. Morning rituals in the Lupanar are both sacred and absurd. First, sweep out the floor with a bundle of stiff reeds. Away yesterday's wine stains, dust, and whatever fell out of the senator's sandals during his 11 p.m. visit you. Mutter to yourself as you clean, not because it helps, but because it fills the silence and keeps you from noticing how loudly your stomach is growling. Breakfast, if you're lucky, will be a crust of bread stolen from the tavern, kitchen or gifted by a kinder client, some of them genuinely like you, or they like the version of you they think you are, which is close enough. You smear a bit of lead-based face powder over your cheeks. Dangerous. Yes, but pale skin is in fashion, and death from slow poisoning is a long-term problem. You rub coal around your eyes, not for glamour, but to look less exhausted. The idea is to look mysterious, not like you've spent the night fending off a man who thought he was Jupiter reincarnated. Your smile, practiced in the cracked mirror, is just lopsided enough to seem flirtatious. You remind yourself that mystery sells. You're not just a woman. You're an idea wrapped in linen and rouge. There's a knock. Business hours are not a choice. You peek through the curtain. A young man, probably a soldier, nervous, and standing with a posture that suggests both pride and shame. His tunic is stained, his sandals dusty, but he holds a coin in his hand like it's a ticket to another life. You recognize that coin, it's bronze, not silver, but you're not in a position to argue. You motion him in with a tilt of your head. He crosses the threshold as if entering a temple. You suppress a sigh, not because of what's about to happen, but because of what's not. He won't ask your name, and you won't offer it. That part of you stays behind the curtain. The transaction is quick, mechanical, and awkward. He leaves without looking back. You exhale and straighten the bed again. There's still straw on your skin. Still time left in the day. You're 24 minutes into your shift. Across the hall, you hear Livia laughing. She's louder than necessary, which means the client is wealthy, or important, or both. She has a knack for charm, even when her eyes say she's anywhere but here. You admire her for that, or envy her. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. Rome doesn't run on laws. It runs on glances, whispers, and social grease. In the Lupanar hierarchy is invisible, but absolute. There are girls who work upstairs, near the windows, and girls like you who stay down here in the dark. The ones upstairs see more daylight, fewer fleas, and better pay. But they also see more risk. More important clients means more danger, more expectation. Down here, in the cellar, you're anonymous, replaceable, forgotten until you're needed. But anonymity can be a form of safety. You've learned to find freedom in shadows. It's better to be the girl no one remembers than the one who draws too much attention. Your mind drifts, as it often does, to the lives outside. The markets with their noisy vendors, the temples with incense that never reaches you, the women with parasols and clean stolas who passed you by without ever meeting your eyes. They pretend not to see you, and maybe you don't want them to. Still, there are moments when the curtain rustles just right, when the breeze smells of figs instead of sweat, that you imagine a different life. Not noble, not extravagant, just quiet, clean. Yours but dreams don't pay for lunch. And speaking of, you realize with irritation that you're still hungry. There's a chance the tavern cook will toss you something if you flirt. Just retort if she's in a generous mood. Either way, it's a risk. You slip on your outer wrap, adjust your hair to look intentional instead of just tired, and head toward the staircase, hoping not to run into the landlord on the way. He's behind on repairs, but never on collecting rent. Upstairs, the light nearly blinds you. Rome is loud and bright in ways your cellar never is. You feel both exposed and forgotten at once. As you walk toward the kitchen, dodging a drunk patron who mumbles an apology. You hear the clang of coins in someone's purse and wonder how many more knocks will come today. And if any of them will ask your name, probably not. But hope, like lead powder, sticks stubbornly to the skin. You walk past the tavern's smoky hearth, where a spit turns slowly over a reluctant flame, roasting something that once had legs and a name, now dripping fat into the fire below. The cook eyes you with the same suspicion she reserves for overcooked lentils, and you return the glance with your most neutral half-smile, the one that says, "I won't steal, but I might charm you into forgetting I'm here." She grunts and gestures toward a chipped bowl half filled with last night's bean mash, thick as plaster and only slightly more flavorful. You nod your thanks, grab it with both hands, and scurry out before generosity has time to turn sour. Back in your dim corridor, you perch at the top step leading down to the cellar, balancing the bowl on your knees while steam fogs the chill of your bones. Around you, Rome pulses. Footsteps slap cobblestones outside. A lute strums off-key in the tavern's corner, and above it all, voices rise, laughter, bargaining, gossip. Someone's accusing someone else of sleeping with their neighbor's daughter. You snort softly, as if that's unusual. A door creaks open. Livia again. She emerges flushed, adjusting her tunic and shaking her head like she just escaped a wild animal. She sits beside you without asking, stealing a fingerful of your beans with the precision of someone who's done this before. You don't complain. It's easier to share than to argue. "Client," you ask. "Senator's nephew," she replies, licking bean paste off her thumb. "Thinks he's a poet." Rhymed Venus with penis. You snort harder, this time, and the sound echoes off the stone. You're not supposed to laugh. Prostitutes are supposed to smile seductively, whisper sweet nothings, and remain eternally alluring. But sometimes, laughter is all you have left. You ask her if she remembers when you both started. She squints upward, pretending to count on her fingers. "Third full moon of spring, 2 years ago, you had shoes. I thought that was impressive." You look down at your feet bare now, calloused, but stronger than they used to be. The shoes lasted about 3 months before the soles gave out and a sailor threw up on them. You never replaced them. Too expensive. Too easily ruined. The conversation drifts. She tells you about a client who claimed he was a centurion, then cried afterward because his wife wouldn't speak to him. You tell her about the man who paid double just to lie beside you without touching, whispering the name of someone long dead. These are the things no one writes in the graffiti. No one carves sadness into stone. When the bowl is empty, she returns to her room, and you return to yours. Business never stops, and the next knock might be the one that matters, though you don't know why. Maybe it's the hope that someone will treat you like more than an object. Or maybe it's just survival instinct, dressed in longing. You freshen up quickly, splashing water from a chipped amphora onto your face. It's not clean, but it's wet, and that's enough. You rub scented oil behind your ears, the same bottle you've stretched for 6 months now, and reapply your chalk. The mirror, still cracked, shows a woman who looks vaguely alert. You hum to yourself a tune from your childhood, perhaps, though the words are lost. Music is banned in the Lupanor, unless played by clients, but you miss it. You miss a lot of things. Books, quiet, mornings that don't start with fear. There's a sound, a low guttural laugh from upstairs. Then hurried footsteps. Then a slap. You freeze. Not your business. Not today. You keep your head down, pretending not to hear. But the sounds stay with you, even after they stop. Rome is full of things better not spoken aloud. Hours pass. You see 5 clients. One brings wine, to leave quickly. One insists on being called Domitian, though he looks nothing like the statue. And the last gives you a copper coin and a small bag of dates, as thanks. You savor the dates slowly, one by one, after he leaves. Sweet, sticky. They remind you of the countryside you haven't seen in years. You once lived near orchards, real ones, with birds, and mothers who scolded you for climbing trees. You told yourself you'd return one day, after you'd earned enough. Now you know. Enough is a word with no meaning here. The curtain shifts again. A familiar face, this time irregular. He always knocks twice, always asks if you've eaten, always brings something. Today, it's a boiled egg and a stale honey cake. You smile without meaning to. He's not handsome. His beard is uneven, his toga wrinkled, but he listens. He talks to you like you matter. You let him in. He sits on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd you. You eat the egg first. It's overcooked, crumbly, but warm. He tells you about his sister's wedding. You pretend to care, and then realize you do. A little enough. Afterward, he thanks you softly and presses your hand before leaving. You stand there for a long time after the curtain falls. That's the trick, isn't it? You learn to care just enough to survive, but not so much that you break. Evening approaches. You hear footsteps in the corridor, fast, panicked. A girl you barely know rushes past, face pale, eyes wild. You don't ask, you just move. Some things are universal. Danger is one of them. The landlord follows minutes. Later, grumbling, shirt stained with wine. You wait until his steps fade before stepping into the hallway. Livia peeks out. He cornered her. She whispers. She bit him. Ran. You nod. No surprise, no solution. Just a tired, cold truth. Rome will remember its poets and its emperors, but never her name. Back in your room, you sit in the darkness. The oil lamp is out again. You light a new wick with trembling hands and settle onto your straw. Tomorrow will come. So will more knocks. You hope Livia's right, that it was the 3rd full moon. That you've only been here 2 years. But it feels longer, like you were born beneath this tavern, formed from clay and ash and whispered prayers. You close your eyes and imagine light, filtering through leaves. Somewhere far away, someone is playing a flute. You almost remember the melody. Almost. The morning doesn't come so much as it bleeds into the room, slow and uncertain, filtered through the cracked boards above your ceiling. The dull scrape of sandals on stone outside hinting that the day has already started without your permission. You haven't truly slept. No one here ever does. Rest comes in stolen fragments, moments when the street quiets and the smell's dim enough for your body to forget it exists. But now your limbs are awake, if not eager, and so you rise, stretch your arms in the narrow space until your fingertips graze opposite walls, and listen. No knocks yet. Good. Maybe you'll have enough time to visit the public fountain before your first client. It's a gamble. There's no telling how many others will be jostling for space around the basin, nor whether the water will be clean or the conversation tolerable. Still, it's better than nothing. You throw on your shawl, fingers fumbling at the fraying edges, and step into the corridor. The scent of vinegar-soaked lentils and smoke fills the stairwell. Livia is already gone, her room empty, the curtain flapping like an abandoned sail. You climb carefully, dodging the loose board on the 4th step, and emerge into the blinding light of the upper floor, where the tavern workers and early patrons blur past like ghosts in the fog of wine and cheap cologne. Outside, Rome is waking. You smell charred meat from the nearby vendor stall, mixed with whetstone and manure. A cart rattles by, overloaded with amphorae and shouting. You make your way toward the communal fountain near the corner of the noisiest, most crowded, least forgettable neighborhood. The fountain is already surrounded by women with clay jugs balanced on their hips, children kicking dust, and an elderly man trying to wash his sandals while muttering invectives about the emperor's taxes. You push your way in politely, splash water on your face, and take a deep breath. Cold, bracing, and faintly metallic. You rub at the chalk residue still clinging to your jaw, then scrub your arms and neck with a square of linen soaked in natron. It stings, slightly. Natron always does. Salt and ash don't make for gentle exfoliants, but it's all you've got. You spot a familiar face across the fountain, a girl named Sabina, younger than you, barely 15. She waves half-heartedly. Before returning to her washing, her movements robotic. You haven't spoken to her much, but you know her story. Everyone does. Taken by debt, sold by her father, she was brought into the Lupanor by a woman who claimed she'd be looked after. Sabina never talks about it. She doesn't need to. Her silence says more than words ever could. You finish quickly, pat your skin dry with a corner of your tunic, and turn back toward the brothel. On the way, you pass a forum where a man is, shouting about philosophy, gesturing wildly with one hand while holding a pigeon in the other. You pause. He's talking about the soul, how it transmigrates from body to body, carrying with it fragments of its past lives. You wonder, briefly, who you might have been before this. A weaver, a musician, a stray cat with better instincts. You reach your doorstep with the thought still lingering, like the final note of a song that never resolves. Inside, your curtain flutters. Someone's already waiting. You step into your cell and find him their new face. Rich, judging by the rings on his fingers and the quality of his sandals. Though the desperation in his eyes betrays a different truth, you welcome him in with a nod, offer him the stool, and listen as he stammers about a bad marriage and a worse dream. You guide him to the bed gently, mechanically, carefully suppressing the reflex to detach. He wants tenderness, the kind he thinks he's buying but that no one can fake convincingly. You do your best. After he leaves, he places 2 coins on the stool. Gold, not common. You stare at them, then tuck them under the loose board in the cornara, secret stash, shared only with Livia. Neither of you trust the landlord, and for good reason. He's been known to borrow from the girls without asking, and his debts to the local wine merchant seem to grow faster than mold on bread. You sit on the edge of your bed, fingering the fraying hem of your tunic, when you hear raised voices outside. A group of men is arguing. 2 are clearly drunk. One is clearly bored, and one seems genuinely fascinated by a debate about whether pleasure corrupts the soul or merely distracts it. You roll your eyes and tune them out. Rome's philosophers love talking about sin, especially when they're walking home from a brothel. The irony is rarely acknowledged. You lie back, staring at the ceiling, the same patch of wood where a knot forms a shape you've decided looks like a fish. You've given it a name, Felix. Felix is your ceiling fish, your silent companion during long nights and longer thoughts. You wonder if he remembers everything, like you do. The knocking starts again. This one is different. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then one softer. You know that rhythm. It's the scholar. He never gives his name, but he always arrives just after midday, smelling faintly of ink and panic. He's always full of questions, not about you, but about the world. Today he asks about dreams. Do you dream? What do you dream about? Are they always the same? You answer honestly, you don't know. You're rarely asleep long enough to remember. He nods, pensive. and begins to talk about Cicero's lost works, about how memory might be a prison, or a map, or a trick. You listen, not because you care about Cicero, but because his voice is soothing, like rain tapping on stone. He pays, well, too. Not just in coins, but in something rarer, genuine attention. You sometimes wonder why he comes here. Surely he could find comfort elsewhere, among the libraries or upper-class courtesans. But maybe that's the point. Maybe he wants to be unseen, to vanish into the cracks of the city, like you do. After he leaves, you sit for a long time with his questions rattling in your skull. Do you dream? And if not, are you still fully alive? The thought chills you. You light the lamp again, even though oil is low, and try to write something, a scrap of wax tablet you stole from a client's bag weeks ago. You carve a single word. Sparrow, I hope. You don't know why. You might think Rome's chaos left little time for bureaucracy, but even your body couldn't escape paperwork, not entirely, anyway. In certain parts of the empire, especially in the capital and major trade ports like Ostia and Pompeii, sex work wasn't just tolerated, it was taxed, regulated, and inscribed in records just like any other occupation. Though of course, it was never treated with the same dignity. If you were a known courtesan, especially one who worked openly at a lupena, or under a madam, you might be required to register with local authorities and pay a special tax called the vecticle. This tax wasn't high, but it meant one very dangerous thing: your name and trade could be recorded, forever tying you to this work and severing all hope of respectability if you ever wished to leave it behind. To the state, you were a meretrix, legally defined and categorized, not just by what you did, but by what you were allowed not to be. Once registered, your rights changed suddenly. You couldn't legally marry a Roman citizen. You couldn't inherit certain types of property. You couldn't even wear specific clothing reserved for matrons and respectable free women. It was as though your registration came with a silent stamp across your forehead: used, ruined, untouchable. But what if you didn't want that? What if you wanted to keep the freedom to slip through Rome's alleys without being labeled? That's where the secret codes and underground tricks came in. Many women, especially the cleverest and the ones with powerful protectors, operated off the books. They posed as actresses, dancers, masseuses, or even hostesses, depending on what they needed to avoid the tax collector's ink and the moral branding that came with it. Some madams paid off officials to keep whole houses unregistered, offering hush coins in exchange for silence and discretion. Others used aliases in their dealings and invented backstories so elaborate they might rival the myths of Ovid. You weren't Julia the prostitute, who were Marcella, a foreign dancer from Gaul who'd only just arrived, always conveniently new, always passing through. Never settled long enough for the paperwork to find you, and if you were truly bold, you might leave hints in your attire. A yellow tunic, the color associated with prostitutes, could be worn ironically, or avoided entirely, depending on your angle. You might wear a common woman's dress and blend in. Or you might adorn yourself just enough to attract clients, but not the gaze of regulators. Some girls even developed their own spoken slang or hand gestures to indicate their services without ever saying the forbidden words aloud. It wasn't safe to advertise directly, unless you were in a legal brothel. So the streetwalkers used coded phrases like seeking wine or offering warmth. You learned how to smile in a way that said, yes, for a price, but also how to frown in a way that meant, no, I'm not registered, don't ask questions. A good working girl needed not just beauty and stamina, but the instincts of a spy. You knew which taverns the inspectors frequented and which nights they liked to do surprise checks. You avoided the forums on tax day and took the long way home if you saw an unfamiliar scribe with to clean a toga. Sometimes, if you were particularly unlucky, you'd be caught and forced to pay back taxes, or worse, be forcibly registered, which came with a public declaration in the record books. After that, your fate was sealed. Clients might still come, but your options for escape narrowed like a tightening fist. You couldn't marry out, couldn't pretend anymore, and the fantasy of becoming a merchant's kept woman or a senator's secret lover dimmed. Unless, of course, you had leverage. And leverage, in your world, meant secrets. You learned to keep conversations overheard in bed. Letters dropped by careless clients. Pillow talk that included everything from assassination rumors to debts owed to high-ranking generals. Sometimes, you traded these secrets to protect your identity. Other times, you used them to buy freedom not just for yourself, but for a friend, a sister, a favorite slave girl in the same house. Your world revolved around these delicate exchanges: information for protection, silence for survival, coin for a name that didn't appear on any scroll. And in that liminal space, you became something far more dangerous than a mere pleasure worker. You became a woman with knowledge. In Rome, that alone could make you powerful or dead. Of course, even the licensed ones found their ways around things. Some registered under false names. Others lied about their income to lower their tax burden. And still others worked both sides, maintaining a respectable persona by day, while slipping into the shadows at night. Aided by wigs, makeup, and a change of accent. Rome was a city of masks, and you were its most adaptable performer. The authorities didn't care about your survival, only your silence. As long as the tax flowed, the paperwork was maintained, and the scandals stayed hidden, you could exist in the margins. Unacknowledged, but always needed. But you knew deep down that it only took one wrong glance, one jealous rival, one rejected official, to bring the whole thing down. Then the inspectors would come knocking, parchment in hand, asking questions you couldn't afford to answer. That's why you kept a second stash of coins hidden, a fake name rehearsed, and an exit plan you whispered to yourself every night before sleep. And when you looked into the bronze mirror and powdered your face with chalk, you weren't just preparing for another client, you were preparing for war, a quiet war of paperwork and whispers, fought with lashes and ledger books, and for now at least, you were winning. Inside the Lupena, the air is not merely thick with oil and sweat, nor only scented by the remnants of roasted garum from nearby kitchens or the vinegar-soaked towels. Used to mask less appealing odors, it is heavy with something else entirely, something intangible yet unmistakable, the breathless hush of hundreds of secrets baked into stone, echoing without a voice, louder than a scream yet quieter than a whisper. You wake each day with the knowledge that the walls here remember more than any living soul does. They hold memories and etchings, in the coarse scratches of styluses pressed against plaster, in the desperate carvings of clients, workers, drifters, and the anonymous ghosts who pass through. These markings are crude, yes, but also curiously honest, an ancient form of emotional graffiti. Messy and raw and urgent, as if scrawled in the heat of obsession or sorrow. One inscription, barely visible in the dim lantern light, says, "I screwed Maritina here," while another boasts with drunken pride, "Felix had the best time with Fortunata. She moaned like a goddess." Sometimes, names are written with such affection or desperation that they seem to beg the wall to remember them, to validate the writer's fleeting moment of passion or loneliness. Other times, the tone is bitter or mocking, full of jealousy or frustration. "She took my coin and gave me nothing," or "Beware of Livia. Her beauty hides a dagger." These are not simply jokes or vulgarities. They are psychological fossils, remnants of transactions that were more than financial, sometimes rupturing the soul, sometimes barely touching it. You walk these corridors every day, brushing your fingers against stone that might bear your name, etched by someone who cannot recall your face but remembers the sound you made or the lie you whispered. There are images, too graphic and of swollen phalluses with wings, entwined bodies performing contortions that seem physically impossible. Faces rendered in 3 lines with crude emotion. Some are caricatures, but others hold a strange artistry. The desperate artistry of people who have no paper, no audience, and so must immortalize their desire in walls that will not laugh at them. What strikes you most are the conversations between strangers, written days or months apart, like proto-comment threads. "Thalea was better than Julia," reads one. A few scratches later, "You must be blind. Julia knows how to use her tongue." The walls hold arguments, agreements, memories, slanders, and confessions. You've even seen poetry, in broken Latin, praising a girl named Alia. Her eyes were 2 moons, her breath a rose, her silence a knife. You once touched a line that read, "I came here to forget her." Just beneath it, She cried but said nothing. That one haunts you. Was it written with guilt or cruelty? Was it about you? Could it be? One night you pass a new drawing and pause. The shape is rough, but you recognize it fits you, or someone meant to be you. The nose is wrong, the hips exaggerated, but the eyes, somehow, are right. You stare at it for a long time, uncertain if it's admiration or mockery. The uncertainty gnaws at you. You wonder who made it, and whether they did so with trembling affection, or while laughing with friends. Did they draw you from memory, in longing, or from frustration? And most importantly, what will the next man who sees it think? Some requests you receive are strange, pushed by wine, or boredom, or buried shame. Men bring tinted lamps to cast red or green light across your skin, and ask you to pretend to be Venus descending, or a Thracian boy, or their dead wife reborn. Some carry wooden masks, goat faces, lion snarls, owl eyes, and beg you to wear them and mimic the animal's sounds. Others want role play, silence, arguments, innocence, danger. A few want nothing but to cry. One man only ever asks to hold your hand in silence while whispering his mother's name. And you do it, because pretending pays better than resistance. You become a chameleon. You learn to read eyes before mouths speak, to gauge if the request is merely strange or dangerously unstable. You know the difference between a fantasy and a pathology. You know how to laugh gently and steer the moment elsewhere when things go too far. How to mask fear with curiosity. How to say maybe next time in a way that makes them think it was their idea to stop. You keep lists in your mind: what you'll tolerate, what you'll endure, what you'll never do again, not even for triple. You know which guards can be bribed, which ones listen, which ones look the other way. You know where to stash emergency coin, who to whisper to if something happens, how to fake a faint if needed. And through it all, your body ceases to be just flesh. It becomes currency, disguise, negotiation tool, survival kit. You are more than a courtesan. You are a politician in silk, a strategist in perfume, a performer on the most perilous stage. When your shift ends, if it ends, you retreat to the back rooms, where the girls shed their costumes, wipe off the coal, rub salves onto bruises, and sit in exhausted silence. You often return to the wall. It's a strange comfort. One inscription simply says, "She changed me." Another, "I'll be back for you, little moon." You wonder if they meant someone specific, or some imagined version of you. You wonder if anyone will ever write something true about you, something not about the sex, or the lies, or the role you played. You imagine something like, "She listened," or "She knew I was afraid." But you also know, deep down, that what men remember is not you, it's the experience they bought, the illusion you constructed, the mask they wanted you to wear. You are not the name they carved, not the drawing they left behind, not the groan or giggle they paid for. You are the architect of their fantasy. But even architects grow tired. You dream sometimes of what it would be like to stop pretending, to have someone knock and say, "No need to act tonight." But dreams are dangerous luxuries here. Pretending keeps the coin flowing, keeps the pain in check, keeps you alive. The performance is exhausting, yes, but it's also armor. If you stop, even for a moment, you risk letting in everything you've been protecting yourself from. So, you rise again, each evening, drape yourself in whatever illusion is required, and walk back out into the corridors lit by flickering lamps and shadowed by memory. Somewhere along that corridor, you notice a new blank patch of wall-clean plaster, untouched by stylus or sweat or shame. Someone will mark it soon. Someone always does. Perhaps with your name. Perhaps with a lie. Perhaps, if you're lucky, with something almost true. Inside the lupanar, the air is thick, not just with the mingling scents of oil, unwashed linen, old sweat, and distant cooking fires, but with whispers that echo without mouths speaking. The walls themselves seem to speak more loudly than anyone here dares to. Along every corridor of this brothel, crude messages and drawings are etched into the stone, scrawled by clients and workers alike, each line a moment captured in history. They aren't just graffiti, they are confessions, boasts, warnings, and sometimes simple records of desire. One carving reads, I screwed Maritina here, while another brags. Felix had the best time with Fortunata. She moaned like a goddess. There's a strange honesty to it. Patrons who wouldn't look you in the eyes might still leave behind their name or symbol, as if the act meant more when carved in stone. Some inscriptions are less lewd and more melancholic. I came here to forget her, or the chilling she cried but said nothing. These phrases sit beside caricature, like sketches phallic symbols. Contorted bodies, even ancient emojis, of sorts grotesque and expressive. It's art and filth, memorial and vandalism, all at once. There are even debates scratched between visitors, like an early form of comment thread. Philea was better than Julia. Followed days later by, you must be blind. Julia knows how to use her tongue. You walk these halls every day, knowing your name might one day appear here too. Written by someone who can't remember your face, but remembers what you did with your hands. Some of these crude scribbles become almost sacred texts in their own way, revisited by newcomers, or whispered about by the girls, as they laugh behind closed curtains. Others become stories we pass around to ease the boredom. Did you see the one with the man and the goat? Until they become legends inside. Our tired heads. You touch the wall one day, and find something new, a drawing that resembles you, or someone who could be you. It's unsettling. Was it drawn in admiration, or mockery, or worse? You never know who holds the stylus, or what mood they're in when they scratch you into permanence. Sometimes they draw you with exaggerated breasts, other times as a stick figure with a crude symbol next to it. Maybe a heart, maybe a dagger. And then there are the strange requests, whispered by men who think you're too poor to refuse. Some bring oil lamps with colored lenses, casting red or green shadows as they ask to pretend you're a goddess, or a boy, or their dead wife. Others want you to wear masks of animals, lions, goats, birds, and make the sounds to match. Some want silence, absolute silence, even as their hands tremble. You learn to adapt, to become who they need. It's not always degrading, it's theatrical, sometimes almost hilarious, but always, always exhausting. You've become a master of the pivot. Smile sweetly when they offer figs, and ask for something too weird. Then distract them with a compliment, a joke, a mystery. Your charm is your shield. Your voice, when used right, can make even the strangest proposition feel like their idea, not yours. You make characters out of yourself, the virgin, the widow, the wild Thracian, the shy Greek. Girl, and you slip in and out of them like a practiced actress. But there are requests that cross lines. Ones where you must smile with your eyes while your brain screams, remembering which guards will listen and which ones won't. You make mental lists: what's bearable, what's tolerable, what you'll only do once, and what you'll never do again, not even for triple. Your body isn't just a body anymore. It's a marketplace, a stage, a political zone, a diary of boundaries tested and redrawn. You know the whispers from the men mean more than the coins they toss. Each request is a glimpse into their shadow, their dreams, their griefs, and some of those dreams are dangerous. You've seen girls dragged back inside by the hair for refusing to fast. You've seen girls paid twice for just smiling the right way. There are patterns, there are rules. You learn them not because anyone teaches you, but because survival depends on it. You learn to tell who drinks too much, who brags too loud, who cries after, who likes to hurt but wants it called play. And when your shift ends, if it ends, you sometimes sit in the back room where no customers go, and read the walls again. One reads, "She changed me." Another, "I'll be back for you, little moon." You wonder if the girl he meant even worked here, or if he was hallucinating on wine and loneliness. You wonder if someone will ever write something beautiful about you, something more than just what you did. You want it secretly. Something like, "She listened," or "She knew I was afraid." But deep down, you also know what they remember isn't the real you. It's the version they could pay for. You are not the scribbled name. You are not the drawing. You are not the whisper in the dark. But you keep pretending. Because pretending keeps the coin flowing, the bruises manageable, the masks in place. And somewhere, on the far end of the corridor, there's a new blank space on the wall, and someone's already reaching for a stylus. and the line they carve might be about you, or someone like you, or no one at all, but it becomes part of your world now, etched forever, waiting for a new set of eyes to trace the grooves and wonder who it was that made someone write that, in the dark, after everything had already been said. Inside the dim privacy of the Lupaner's hidden storage nook, where old linens, chipped pottery, and half-empty amphorae are stacked like the forgotten remnants of lives briefly intersecting, there's a secret pocket of stillness, known only to the women who live behind the painted smiles and practiced performances. It isn't a sanctuary by any generous stretch of the imagination. The air here is sour with the scent of old oil, dust, and forgotten bodies, and the torchlight that glimmers faintly from the main corridor doesn't dare reach far into the corners, leaving most of the room to a humid gray that blurs shapes into memories. But in this pocket of gloom, a strange sort of peace settles, fragile and momentary. It's the kind of place where you don't. Criders are far too precious to waste, but where you might sigh quietly into your hands. Not as surrender, but as release. The broken crate you sit on groans under your weight, not from heaviness, but from long fatigue, as though it too remembers how many backs have leaned here in exhaustion, seeking 1 minute of self beneath the relentless grind of the night's demands. You curl your arms around your knees and let your head rest back against the wall, letting your eyes trace the jagged shadows like ancient hieroglyphs. Your thoughts wander places they're not supposed to. Go not in a place like this, where memory is a weakness, where dreams are a hazard, where hoping too vividly can be mistaken for disobedience. And yet they go there anyway, disobedient and alive. You remember your village, the shape of the fields when the wheat turned gold, the sound of hens rustling in the straw at dusk. You remember the curve of your sister's laughter and the warm, calloused hands of your mother braiding your hair on festival days. And you remember the lie you told yourself the first night you arrived here, that you'd only stay a little while, just long enough to earn enough coin to return home with pride instead of shame. That lie has long since frayed, worn away by the harsh rinse of nights filled with men who never learn your name, who look at you like you're a fig to be peeled and bitten into, not a person with a beginning and an end. Even now, a bruise on your collarbone blossoms in aching blue, a faint reminder of a client who preferred roughness over charm, and the cut on your palm still stings from the oil lamp you dropped while trying to clean in haste. Still, you come to this hidden room not to escape the pain, but to breathe it. It is, strangely, one of the only things in your world that feels entirely yours. In here, no one is watching you. No one is appraising your smile, your posture, your availability. And so, for a few heartbeats, you're allowed to be human. Just a woman, not a vessel. And in these brief minutes, you whisper things to yourself. Not out loud, never out loud, but in that silent inner voice that you fear may one day grow too quiet to hear. You tell yourself that you are still here. You tell yourself you are more than the tally marks scratched into the Lupaner's ledgers. You tell yourself that somewhere inside you still lives the girl who danced barefoot at the village harvest and once believed a promise meant forever. But then the silence begins to shift. Footsteps shuffle down the corridor, voices murmur too close, and the magic collapses like a shell cracking under weight. You rise slowly, each movement weighted, like waking from a dream you weren't ready to end. You smooth your stola, with fingers that tremble slightly from exhaustion, then reach for the polished bronze mirror wedged beside the crate. It is a poor reflection, distorted by time and tarnish, but it shows you enough. You touch your face, rub color into your cheeks, twist your hair into something like order, and rehearse the smile you'll wear like armor. That smile has become your mask, your weapon, your shield. Without it, you are vulnerable. And in the Lupana, vulnerability is as dangerous as defiance. You whisper nothing as you part the curtain again, stepping back into the glow of flickering torches and murmuring shadows. The air outside is warm and wet, with too many bodies pressed too close. And as you pass one of the other women, she catches your eye just long enough to nod. Not out of friendliness, there is no room for friendship, here but recognition. A silent acknowledgement of survival. The guard waiting by the wall jerks his chin toward the green-tiled room. And you walk without protest, though your feet protest every step. That room always unsettles you, the serpentine mosaic on the floor, winding like a living thing. curling around itself in patterns that seem to whisper secrets if you stare too long. But you don't look at the floor. You look at the client, already reclining on the low couch, with a smirk that reminds you how far you are from anything sacred. You smile, because that's what you're good at. Because smiles can hide everything: pain, weariness, contempt, even despair. You sit beside him, adjusting your posture to match whatever fantasy he expects, and begin to speak the words you've said 1,000 times. You ask where he's from. You pretend to be curious. You touch his arm as though it matters to you, but in your mind, you are back in that little storage room. You are whispering to the girl you used to be, promising her that you haven't forgotten, that despite everything, you still remember who you were before all of this. And for now, that has to be enough. Because in the Lupaner, survival isn't measured in coins or customers, it's measured in how well you can keep pretending without becoming the lie. And you, despite it all, are still pretending beautifully. Inside the Lupana, where the passage of time is measured more by the flickering of oil lamps than the rise and fall of the sun, a strange economy of survival has taken root, one where the women learn to trade not only their bodies, but their glances, silences, and subtle movements, as if these two had value in a world so rigidly structured by Roman expectations. There is an art to reading a man before he opens his mouth, before he even enters the room, an instinct born from repetition, from bruises and rewards and unspoken patterns. You learn to spot the ones who want to be worshipped versus the ones who want to punish, the ones who will cry afterwards versus the ones who will never speak a word. The clink of their coin pouch, the posture of their shoulders, the shoes they wear, everything is a signal. You begin to see the layers beneath their togas, like sediment in an old pot: shame, entitlement, longing, cruelty, and sometimes, just sometimes, a faint whisper of kindness. But that last one is the most dangerous, because it can trick even the most hardened woman into believing in possibility. And here, possibility is a poison that kills slowly. The house itself lives and breathes with its own logic. The narrow corridors echo with uneven footsteps, guards barking at each other, the scrape of sandals, the occasional crash of pottery or startled laughter. The brothel is both a stage and a trap. Its painted walls, once vibrant with erotic frescoes, have faded from use and smoke and time. In one corner, the image of Venus remains almost intact, smiling with a tilt of her head, as if mocking every woman beneath her who dared hope for anything more. The clients don't notice the art anymore. To them, the decor is just part of the service, part of the illusion that this is something divine or pleasurable, rather than mechanical and purchased. But for the women who live within these walls, the fading paint tells stories more truthful than any client ever has. Each chipped edge is a mark of how long you've been here. Each crack in the plaster is a reminder of something broken long ago that no one ever bothered to fix. There are hierarchies even among the women, subtle but deeply felt. The ones with patrons, wealthy repeat clients who offer gifts and temporary protection, hold a higher place than those still scrambling for every shift. Then there are the newcomers, wide-eyed and soft-voiced, still trying to make sense of the rules. They're watched closely, both by the guards and by the more seasoned women. Not out of cruelty, but because everyone knows the faster a girl adapts, the better her chances of avoiding the worst fates. If she learns to smile at the right moment, to divert a man's anger with a well-placed compliment or a gentle joke, she might survive her first month intact, maybe. One girl, her name is Livia, though she rarely says it, now once told you that she counts every visit like beads on a string. She doesn't count the days, only the men. She said it makes time easier to understand that way. You never asked how many beads are on her string now. You didn't want to know. In this place, curiosity can feel like cruelty. Food arrives at irregular times, pass through the kitchen window in chipped bowls, barley stew, stale bread, sometimes olives, if the house is doing well. The meals are small, but necessary, and more importantly, they are communal. For a few minutes each day, the women sit in a cramped corner together, eating in relative silence. These are the moments when the masks can slip a little, when someone might mutter a joke, or offer a piece of fruit snuck from a client's plate. You've seen a woman cry over a ripe fig once, not because it was delicious, but because it reminded her of home. That's the thing about memories, they sneak up on you in the quietest ways, riding in on the scent of cinnamon or the texture of a wool shawl. The guards don't often enter the women's quarters without reason. When they do, it's either for violence or inspection. Both are unwelcome. Their presence chills the air, and every conversation stops mid-sentence. One woman dragged out last week for backtalk. No one has seen her since. The silence that followed her disappearance was louder than any scream. Among the women, stories become warnings. Don't look a man in the eye unless he invites it. Don't laugh too loud, it's seen as mockery. Don't refuse a client's odd request unless you want your pay docked, or worse. These aren't rules written anywhere. They are whispered in shared bunks, passed from woman to woman like talismans. Even the graffiti on the Lupaner's walls serves as a strange kind of scripture. Scrawled by past visitors, it says things like "I came," "I paid," "I conquered," or worse. But hidden among them are messages from women, two-coded phrases that only those who've lived this life can decipher. You once saw a line written faintly in charcoal. "The moon sees me cry." It stayed with you, maybe because it was true. The moon, at least, does not ask for anything in return. Nightfall brings a different rhythm to the Lupaner. The lanterns are lit, perfumes are dabbed behind ears, and the women are arranged like merchandise for the choosing. The housemother, an older woman, who long ago gave up her illusions, walks among you, her sharp eyes catching every flaw. She adjusts your stola, pinches your cheeks to bring color, reminds you to smile. She means well, in her own way. She knows survival means being chosen, and not being chosen can mean punishment. Sometimes you wonder what she sees when she looks at you, if she sees the girl you once were, or just the tool you've become. But there's no time for wondering. The night has begun, and with it, the show. The men enter, drunk, or desperate, or both. They smell of wine, sweat, and ambition. They speak in boastful tones, slapping coins onto tables like kings. But you know the truth of them. You see their loneliness. You hear it in the way they ask for things strange, sad things, just to feel something real. And you give it to them, because that's your job. To pretend their desire is a gift, not a transaction. To turn your pain into their pleasure. To vanish, night after night, behind a smile that isn't yours. And so the hours blur. Names are forgotten. Faces blend together. But inside, a small ember remains. Not hope, exactly. More like defiance. A refusal to disappear entirely. And sometimes, when the lamps burn low and the house grows quiet, you close your eyes and imagine a future beyond this place, not because you believe in it, but because imagining is the only thing that still belongs to you. In the depths of the Roman night, when the last echo of footsteps died in the distance and the embers of the brothel's hearth glowed low with the faintest warmth, the women of the Lupaner entered a strange limbo between exhaustion and ritual. For while the bodies rested, the minds wandered, and this hour, this sacred, heavy silence, belonged to no patron or pimp. It belonged to them alone. It was the hour when the masks could be dropped, when they could stretch out their limbs without worry of posture, when they could sigh, grunt, weep, or even chuckle at the absurdities of the day, without fearing reprisal. These moments, stolen from the jaws of a life that demanded performance, became their true lives. Some of them would quietly rub salves on their bruises, concocted from olive oil and herbs they managed to barter from passing vendors, while others would silently repair torn garments, using slivers of bone as needles and strips of thread unraveled from fraying sheets. There was no room for vanity, here only maintenance, quiet fortitude, and occasional bursts of memory. Memory could be both a tormentor and a healer. Livia, the quiet matriarch among them, once confessed once that she sometimes dreamed of the olive trees from her childhood farm, the sound of cicadas rising from the fields, the feel of her mother's cracked hands cupping her face. She said the memory had faded so much that she no longer trusted it, that it may well be an invention her mind created to comfort itself. Another girl, Cassia, newer to the trade and still raw with confusion, confessed she no longer remembered the faces of her siblings but could remember vividly the exact smell of a client's breath who had once laughed when she flinched. This was the strange dichotomy of the Lupaner. You forgot your name but remembered shame. You lost your place in the world but memorized every crack in the walls around your cell. The language between the women was its own dialect. Entire sentences could be spoken in glances. A raised brow could mean, "Don't trust that client." A glance downward while passing another in the corridor might mean, "Be careful tonight, he's drunk." A slight lean toward another girl during dinner might mean, "I'll share what little food I've hidden." This unspoken camaraderie was the only resistance they had. They could not storm palaces or write petitions, but they could shield one another from harm in subtle, persistent ways. Some nights, they would pool together their coins, hidden beneath floorboards or stuffed into clay pots in the lavatory wall, to pay a bribe to a guard or to secure better food from the market. These acts were not driven by charity, but by survival because, when one of them suffered, it created ripples of danger for all. Disease was another ghost that floated through the corridors. The Roman physicians of the era, skilled though they were in matters of war wounds and philosophical debate, were not particularly generous or knowledgeable when it came to the health of prostitutes. Women in the lupanar concocted their own remedies: fennel for digestive pain, honey mixed with wine for wounds, boiled fig leaves for fevers, and certain types of clay said to prevent unwanted pregnancies, though with uncertain effectiveness. These remedies were passed down not through books, but through whispers, trial and error, and remembered sayings. "Boil it until the leaves turn dark," Livia once instructed as she pressed a poultice onto another girl's shoulder, and "don't let it touch iron. The metal ruins the spell." Whether this was science or superstition hardly mattered. It was something to believe in, and belief had its own power. There was also the matter of names. Few, if any, of the women used their birth names. Names were chosen with care, often inspired by goddesses, flowers, or stars. A girl might name herself Flora, hoping to channel beauty and spring. Another might choose Minerva, imagining a protective cloak of wisdom. The act of naming oneself was among the few liberties permitted, and it was cherished. For in a world where others named your price, scheduled your hours, and decided your future, choosing a name, even a false one, was an act of silent rebellion. It was a whisper of identity, echoing in a place built to erase it. During certain festivals, especially Saturnalia, when Roman social roles were traditionally reversed and even slaves were allowed to mock their masters, a strange mood took over the brothel. Clients would come in dressed as peasants, laughing and pretending to be lowborn, while the women were encouraged briefly to act like high ladies. For a few days, the roles blurred. Some women found comfort in the pretense, while others found it infuriating, a cruel reminder of the freedoms they'd never truly have. Still, they played along. They would sit a little straighter, drink spiced wine more confidently, and allow themselves to imagine, just for a moment, that they belonged to the world outside, that they could walk freely among the marble forums, buy jewelry without counting denarii, or speak without being spoken to first. But when Saturnalia ended, and the masks were removed, the return to reality was sharper than ever. The walls seemed colder, the locks heavier, the laughter outside more mocking. And yet, life in the lupanar continued. The women adapted. Each year brought new faces, some innocent and wide-eyed, others already hollow with betrayal. The cycle repeated, adaptation, fading. Yet some endured. The older women became protectors, teachers, sometimes enforcers. They kept order not with violence, but with shared understanding. There were rules: never steal another woman's coin, never lie about a dangerous patron, and never under any circumstance turn your back on a crying girl. In this brutal and claustrophobic world, empathy was currency, and cruelty was a contagion they refused to spread among themselves. Beyond the brothel walls, Rome thrived and its chaos. Emperors changed, conquests expanded, senators schemed. But inside these stone walls, history moved differently. Time was marked not by calendars, but by wounds, recoveries, betrayals, and brief, almost holy moments of shared laughter. A joke muttered at the right time could stop a breakdown. A song, hummed in the dark, could silence nightmares. Even the act of combing each other's hair, carefully untangling knots left by rough hands, was a form of worship. One woman's hands, reminding another that she was still human, that she still mattered. And so, in this world carefully hidden, Behind thick curtains and guarded doors, life found a way to persist. Not a grand life, not a glamorous one, but a stubborn, ingenious kind of existence. Because, even in the darkest corners of empire, where the powerful refused to look and the poets refused to write, there were stories. And these women forgotten by history, unnamed in most scrolls, were their authors, scribbling their resilience into the walls of a city that used them but never truly saw them. In the deep hush of late afternoon, when the sun begins its slow descent and casts long golden fingers across the cobbled alleyways of Pompeii, the brothel seems to breathe differently. Not softer never, softer but slower, as if even the walls are exhausted from the performance of another day. Within these weary walls, the torchlight takes on a hazy quality, diffused by the dust stirred from sandals and the oil residue left from countless bodies pressed too closely together. In the corner chamber, the one nearest the cistern, where water is drawn for washing, a new girl has arrived. Her name is whispered first as gossip, then as threat. She is too young, too quiet, and too beautiful not to be noticed. Her arrival disrupts the carefully balanced hierarchy among the other women, each of whom has carved out a fragile existence built not only on their beauty, but on their wits, their ability to navigate the moods of men and the brutality of owners with equal finesse. The veterans of this house know that beauty fades quickly here, like dew under morning sun, and they eye her with a complex blend of pity and resentment. She doesn't speak Latin well, not yet, and the madam has instructed her to remain silent, with clients for now only to smile, obey, and let her silence be mistaken for mystery. This tactic works too well. By the end of her first week, she is requested more than anyone else. Coins with her name attached appear faster than others can gather theirs. One woman, older and hardened by years of compromise, mutters that silence is not mystery, it is merely inexperience dressed as a lure. Another scoffs and says the girl won't last a season. But some part of all of them remembers being that girl once, the one who hadn't yet been broken in by reality, who still flinched at rough hands, who still cried in the night when no one was listening. In private moments, they each wonder which client will be the one to change her. Will it be the drunk, who thinks no means yes? The bored aristocrat, who brings his friends to share her like wine at a feast? Or perhaps the soldier with scars he doesn't talk about, who treats her gently at first, till he doesn't? None of them warn her. What would be the point? Warnings are kindness, and kindness is a luxury few can afford here. In the silent language of the brothel, she will learn as they all did by surviving it. And so the days unfold with painful regularity. The oil lamp in the hallway sputters. The stones remain warm from the sun even after dark. The sheets are stained with sweat and worse, changed only when truly unbearable. The girls rotate rooms, rotate clients, rotate names. Sometimes the clients prefer them to pretend to be someone else, entirely a wife, a goddess, a defeated enemy begging for mercy. Performance is survival. One evening, as twilight creeps through the city, two clients argue over the new girl. One claims to have paid extra to see her exclusively, while the other insists he was promised time as well. The madam intervenes, because she cares, but because conflict between clients can lead to attention from the city watch, which would be bad for business. She placates one man with wine, the other with a different girl. The new girl is told nothing of the incident. She is simply led to the next room, her hand placed gently on the doorframe, as if she were walking into a temple rather than a transaction. Inside, a young Roman senator in training waits. He's clean, perfumed, and dressed with expensive casualness. He does not look cruel, but cruelty in this place rarely looks like cruelty at first. He tells her she reminds him of a painting he once saw in Athenza girl on a marble bench, eyes cast downward, lips parted as if caught between breath and confession. He strokes her face, marvels at her skin, asks her to speak in her native tongue, because it sounds like poetry. She obeys. Later, he will tell his friends about her voice, the way she trembled, how exotic she seemed. He will not mention how young she is, or how he saw the exact moment her eyes stopped looking at him and started looking through him. That night, after the rooms are quiet again and the wine jugs are empty, she returns to the corner near the cistern. She crouches beside the water, splashing her face, her arms, as if she could wash away the sensation of being watched, touched, consumed. One of the older women passes her silently, carrying a towel. She pauses, and lays it beside her without a word. The gesture is small, but not meaningless. In the brothel, where most kindness is measured in glances or crumbs, even a dry towel can feel like mercy. The girl does not thank her. She only presses the towel to her neck and leans her head back against the stone. Her body aches. Her silence aches more. Somewhere outside, in the far-off chaos of a city that lives with wine and fire in its veins, a festival is beginning. You can hear the distant music, the clattering of tambourines and shouts. The whole world is dancing, but not here. Here, in this room, time stands still. The only rhythm is the dripping of water from the cistern, slow and deliberate. The girl listens to it, and lets her mind wander back, perhaps to a village on a hill, perhaps to a brother she once played games with, perhaps to a necklace she once wore before she had to sell it to buy bread. Whatever she's remembering, it doesn't belong in this place. But memories are rebellious that way. They slip through, even when you tell them not to. And for a few stolen minutes, she forgets where she is. She remembers who she was. And in this place, that is the most dangerous act of all. Deep within the marble and moss of Rome's ancient heart, where the echoes of sandals once rang over cobblestone, and the air still holds the breath of dying empires, there exists another layer of the city most Romans never saw, not because it was hidden by darkness, but because it was hidden by discomfort. In this underlayer of experience and existence, where the world of men turned to silent transactions, every sound meant something different. A cough might be code, a footstep could mean danger or relief, and laughter never meant joy. It was in this emotional catacomb, just a few turns beyond the forum, that the Lupaners' women lived and moved like specters that never left footprints. While above them, senators debated the fate of provinces, and emperors declared holidays in honor of conquests. Below them, a different kind of empire hummed to life every night, built not on honor, but on exhaustion. Each evening began with ritual, not holy rites like those found in the temples of Vesta or Jupiter, but the rituals of survival, warming oils over low flame, preparing pigments for the face and breasts, brushing hair until it shined like fresh bronze, and checking the corners of rooms for hidden coins or insects. There were even chants, of a kind quiet mutterings among the women as they tightened belts and shared bitter gossip, who had fallen ill, which guards to avoid tonight, and which clients left bruises instead of coin. These were not spoken as complaints, but like spells against forgetting. To forget was dangerous. To forget meant becoming soft, and softness in a place like this led straight to ruin. For the more seasoned women, those whose smiles had hardened into habits, a strange wisdom began to form. They no longer saw themselves as set actresses or victims, but as archivists of men's hidden selves. They knew what different types of footsteps meant. A slow tread might indicate a drunk nobleman looking for novelty. A hurried pace could belong to a military officer trying to be discreet. And the ones who hesitated at the threshold, those were the ones carrying guilt like wet sand. The women often said you could smell fear, shame, and ambition, all before a man even opened his mouth. For many of them, that was the real work, deciphering the emotional language of their visitors and molding themselves into whatever shape best suited survival. There were even moments of strange, silent bonding between the women, though they would rarely admit it. If one returned from a session, walking unevenly, another might discreetly leave a cloth soaked in poppy oil on her bed. If a new girl began to cry while dressing, an older one might throw her a strip of honeyed date paste without a word. These tiny kindnesses, never spoken of aloud, were the glue that kept them from shattering completely. Yet these gestures could only stretch so far. When a girl disappeared, whether sold elsewhere, dead from infection, or simply too broken to stay, others rarely asked questions. Questions brought attention, and attention here was a form of risk. But loss lingered. You could feel it in the changing rhythm of the group, like a skipped heartbeat in a familiar song. The Lupaner was a place of strict social choreography, with unspoken hierarchies that governed everything from who got which client to who slept closest to the warmth of the kitchen wall. The favored women often received gifts: cheap perfumes, better wine, sometimes even sandals without holes. These things could elevate your status, make the nights more bearable. But they also painted targets on your back. Favor was dangerous in a place that thrived on scarcity. Jealousy was not loud or confrontational. It manifested in smaller cruelties: a torn stola, spoiled cosmetics. Rumors whispered just loudly enough to reach the wrong ears. The matron, known simply as Demetia, ran the house like a ship's captain. She was not cruel, but she was not kind. She operated under the knowledge that kindness was a luxury none of them could afford. Demetia had once been in the trade herself, and her face bore the roadmap of that life: one cheekbone, slightly misshapen from a long-heeled break. A scar along her chin that vanished beneath her collar. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was with the weight of someone who knew that every word spent carelessly might cost you something. It was said she kept a small wooden box hidden beneath her bed filled with the trinkets of her past life. A ring from a senator who once promised to free her, a comb carved from ivory, a torn piece of parchment with a child's name. No one dared ask about it. Everyone knew better than to bring the past into the present. Yet despite the discipline and the silence, Demetia protected the girls in her own way. She kept a ledger, not just of clients and payments, but of threats, of men who struck too hard, who refused payment, who whispered things too sinister to be forgotten. These names were marked with small red dots, and Demetia would quietly ensure they never returned. It wasn't justice, but it was something like power. And power, even in crumbs, was sacred in a place where everyone felt devoured. At night, once the noise of Rome had dulled into the distant murmur of torches and tired voices, some of the women would retreat to the rooftop. It wasn't officially allowed, but Demetia never stopped them. Up there, surrounded by crumbling tiles and the smell of cooling stone, they could see the stars. The same stars that looked down on senators and slaves alike. Some women used this moment to cry, others to pray. A few simply stared at the horizon in silence, watching as smoke from distant hearths curled into the sky. It was said that if you watched long enough, you could forget who you were just for a few minutes. And sometimes, that forgetting felt like the closest thing to freedom they'd ever know. As dawn approached, a hush would fall over the house. The women would return to their rooms, removing jewelry, wiping off color, and folding back into themselves like worn garments. Some would sleep, others couldn't. But all of them understood the unspoken truth that held the place together. They were the unseen architecture of Rome. Their hands, their eyes, their bodies, each one had shaped the city in ways no marble column ever could. And yet, they would never be remembered in the histories written by scribes or carved into monuments. No, their legacy lived in the silences between sentences, in the dreams of the men who came to them, and in the whispered names of women who survived long enough to leave. That was their triumph, their curse, and their quiet revolution. The Lupanar may have belonged to Rome, but its soul, raw, hidden, and enduring, belonged only to the women who endured within it. Begins not in the Lupanar's chambers, but beneath the pale moonlight that spilled unevenly over Pompeii's alleys, casting shadows like ghosts of forgotten lives onto the broken stones. Lucilla had left the building under the pretense of fetching oil from a nearby supplier. Though the truth was simpler, she needed air that hadn't been filtered through incense, sweat, and sorrow. The streets were nearly silent, save for the distant clatter of a cart and the murmured laughter of drunks whose lives had blurred into routine debauchery. She walked quickly, sandals clicking against the stones, but her mind wandered further than her feet could carry her. With every step, memories returned fragmented and unwelcome. Her mother's voice calling her in for supper. The dry rustle of olive trees near her childhood home. A father's song hummed at dusk, before debt swallowed their small world. These memories weren't soothing, they were reminders that she had once lived in a world not defined by coins and skin. She reached a fountain, its lion-headed spout dripping sluggishly into a basin darkened with time. Lucilla sat on the edge, trailing, her fingers in the water and watching ripples distort her reflection. In that moment, she didn't look like Celine or Lucilla, just a woman blurred by weariness. A voice startled her. "Out late, aren't you?" It was Felix, a local scribe, who often spent evenings drinking near the forums and watching the world unravel. He wasn't a client, nor a friend, but a familiar enough face that she didn't flinch. "Needed air," she replied simply. Felix sat beside her, his robe slightly stained with ink and wine. He carried a wax tablet under his arm and smelled faintly of cedarwood. "Funny thing," he said, peering into the water. "This city feels different at night. Quieter, like it's holding its breath." Lucilla nodded, or morning itself. That made Felix chuckle softly. "You always speak like a philosopher. Makes me wonder what you'd have been if life had gone differently." She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "What do you write about?" He shrugged. "Mostly boring things. Property records, grain, shipments, occasionally lovers paying scribes to pen poetry. They're too illiterate to write themselves." "Must be strange," she mused. "To write words that aren't yours, feelings that aren't yours, and yet they live on in ink." He looked at her, intrigued. "And you, Selenior, whatever your name truly is, you speak as if your words have been caged too long." Lucilla smiled without warmth. "They have, but cages make poets of us all." They sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. When she eventually stood, Felix offered her the tablet. "Here," he said, "write something. Anything." She hesitated, then accepted it. The stylus felt heavy in her hand, not from weight, but from significance. She etched a single line. Even a name whispered in darkness is still a song. She handed it back and walked away, not waiting for his response. Back at the Lupaner, the mood had shifted. A client had gotten rough with one of the newer girls, a soft-spoken woman from Crete named Diona. The matron had smoothed things over, coin exchanged. Threats swallowed, but the air was taut with unease. Lucilla found Diona in the storage room, crouched beside an amphora, hugging her knees. Her face was dry, but her eyes looked like broken glass. "Did he hurt you?" Lucilla asked gently. Diona shook her head. "Not much. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm not here. Like my body's moving, but I've already left." Lucilla understood. "Too well. That's how we survive," she said, "by leaving ourselves behind." "But what if we forget how to come back?" Diona whispered. Lucilla didn't have an answer. Instead, she took Diona's hand and held it, silently promising that neither of them had to return alone. Later that night, when Lucilla lay on her cot, staring at the flaking ceiling, she thought about the man from the Sea Tiberius and how he'd looked at her as if trying to read between the lines of a forgotten script. She wondered if he'd meant his kindness, or if it was just another mask. Softer than most, but a mask nonetheless. Trust was a currency rarer than gold here, and far more dangerous to trade in. She turned on her side, listening to the sound of breathing around her, the rhythm of women who had learned to rest only with one eye open. Sleep came slowly, like a tide creeping over sand, and with it came dreams, not of the Lupaner, but of the sea. In them, she stood on a ship's bow, wind in her hair, horizon wide and unscripted. But even in dreams, she felt the weight of the brothel's walls pressing in, reminding her that true freedom was a luxury she could only rent in sleep. When dawn crept in with its cold fingers, painting the walls in diluted gold, Lucilla rose before the others. She tiptoed past snoring bodies and creaking doors and made her way back to the fountain. Felix was gone, but the tablet was there, tucked beneath a stone, protected from dew. On it, beneath her line, he had added, "And every song is a rebellion against silence." Lucilla read it twice, then tucked the tablet beneath her arm and walked back, heart heavier but somehow less hollow. Inside those grimy walls, among the routines and performances, she carried something new, not hope, not exactly, but a defiance wrapped in borrowed poetry. And sometimes, even that was enough to keep breathing. Of all the sounds that drifted through the Lupanar in the long, muddled hours between midnight and the trembling pale light of dawn, those moans half-faked into melody. The soft slap of sandals on pumice-dusted floors, distant shouts from taverns clinging to their last cups of Falernian wine perhaps. The most haunting sound was the quiet, deliberate scratching of a stylus on wax, a sound that was almost reverent in its defiance of everything else around it. This sound came from the small rear room tucked away behind the storage jars and faded drapery, where Drusus, an old Greek with a beard yellowed by age and bad teeth, spent his nights not sleeping, but writing. Once a philosopher, or at least a teacher of it, in the porticos of Athens, Drusus had been broken by debt, betrayal, and migration. His voice, once used to quote Plato, now rented 2 whorehouses and taverns, where words mattered only when they could make someone forget something. He lived now by scribbling down receipts for the lupanar's madam, inventing poetry for lonely soldiers, and most painfully, most curiously composing false letters for the women who worked there, letters addressed to imaginary families who would never read them, but were desperately needed all the same. The women didn't love him, didn't trust him much either, but they tolerated him as one might tolerate a useful ghost. He was the only man in the building who looked at them without calculation or lust. On one quiet evening when the moon was little more than a silver whisper, Lucilla, who rarely wandered far from the main chamber unless summoned, found herself drifting toward the faint glow that bled under the cloth of the scribe's room. She paused at the doorway and, for a moment, watched him silently. The oil lamp flickered on the edge of its wick, casting long, twitching shadows across the cracked wall. And Drusus, hunched and unmoving, looked like he might vanish if she spoke. But she did speak, writing more lies. She asked, not mockingly, but with a tired curiosity. He didn't look up. Sometimes lies are the only thing soft enough to sleep beside, he replied. It wasn't a joke. Nothing ever really was in that room. Lucilla stepped inside and sat across from him on a stool, missing one leg, forced to balance herself as if even conversation here demanded physical effort. "Can you write one for me?" she asked after a moment. He looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "You've never asked before. I didn't need it before." Her voice was flat, but laced with something heavy. Drusus nodded and dipped his stylus again. "Who is it to?" he asked. "No one," she answered. "Just write, as if I'm someone else, a senator's wife, or the daughter of a merchant with property by the sea. Someone with a dog that only eats boiled meat. Someone who can look out her window and see more than just alleyways and smoke." The old man smiled thinly, the lines on his face deepening like creases in old papyrus. He began to write, and she watched. There was no flourish in his movements, just a careful deliberateness, like someone performing a small, sacred ritual. As he wrote, the room seemed to swell around the fiction. Every scratch of the stylus building a new identity for her, brick by invisible brick. The lupanar's noise continued faintly, beyond the curtain. Agrippina, yelling again at a drunk who had shorted her 3 denarii, Paula laughing at some joke, too shallow to last, Julia singing the end of a verse she'd only half remembered. Lucilla let herself drift into the fiction. She imagined herself on a balcony overlooking the Bay of Naples, the wind rustling the sheer linen of her gown. A silver tray beside her, holding a cup of pomegranate juice, and a letter from her husband. At war in Germania, her fingers smelled of rose oil instead of sweat. Her breath was steady, not ragged. Her back didn't ache from hours of forced arching. She wasn't Lucilla anymore. Drusus finally handed her the tablet, the wax still warm from his hand. She didn't read it, just held it. Sometimes the weight of pretend hope was enough. "Thank you," she whispered, more to herself than him, and stood to leave. As she walked back through the corridor, she passed the walls tattooed with graffiti-crude etchings of men, women, gods, animals, and jokes that hadn't been funny even the first time they were scratched. One caught her eye, a winged woman, with shackles laughing. She paused and traced it with a fingertip. Who had drawn it? A bored girl, a soldier, someone trying to leave a piece of themselves behind, in a city that never remembered names, only bodies no matter. It was there, and it would remain, long after she was not. Her last client of the night was a baker, young, loud, smelling of yeast and smoke. He called her by the wrong name and grunted like a pig. When he finished and stumbled out, she collapsed onto the thin cot assigned to her, tucked the wax tablet under the straw-stuffed mattress, and lay back with her arms over her eyes. She didn't cry. That had ended years ago, when crying stopped accomplishing anything. But she did whisper the first line of the letter aloud. "My dearest," she murmured. Today the sea was calm. The words hovered in the stale air like incense from an unseen altar. The room didn't feel less suffocating, but it felt briefly less cruel. In the room next door, Aaliyah hummed a song from her childhood, each note brittle and half forgotten. Paula was already snoring, her breath sour with wine and olives. Julia lay on her back, counting the cracks in the ceiling, pretending they were constellations. Somewhere in the atrium, the madam was snuffing out lamps. Outside, the city of Pompeii slept uneasily beneath a mountain that brooded in silence. The sky gave no warnings. The air smelled faintly of sulfur, but no one noticed anymore. Not even the dogs barked that night. Drosus sat alone in his room, stylus still in hand, gazing at the flame as if hoping it might tell him what he was still doing here, alive, unremembered. In another life, he would have had students quoting him in marble courtyards. In this one, he conjured illusions for the forgotten. And perhaps that, he thought, was its own kind of philosophy. As Lucilla drifted into sleep, the letter pressed under her mattress like a sacred charm. She imagined the sea again blue and endless, not because she had ever seen it from a window, but because she needed it to exist somewhere. And for a few hours, while the city turned in its dreams and the mountain waited, the Lupanar was something almost human. A place where lies gave shelter. A place where the truth, for once, had the decency to stay quiet. In the gray hush before dawn, when even the roosters hesitated to crow and the last oil lamps guttered into silence, the Lupanar became something stranger than a brothel. It became a museum of stillness, each room holding relics of motion now. Paused, Lucilla awoke with the stiffness of a body too long at war with its mattress, the thin straw now reshuffled into awkward lumps beneath her spine. She rubbed her eyes and listened for signs of morning, a bucket splashing, sandals dragging, the hiss of early bread being sold outside the gates, but found none. The city was holding its breath. She rose slowly, wrapping her shawl tight against the creeping chill, and padded barefoot into the main hall where Paula was already seated on the floor with a cracked bowl of barley mash. "No wine today," she muttered without looking up. "He says we cost too much to water like vines." Lucilla nodded. The brothel's owner, a former gladiator named Crassus who fancied himself a businessman, had recently decided to cut costs by rationing their meager comforts. Wine, bathwater, even the tiny scraps of olive oil for skin everything, was now tabulated on a wax ledger, as if they were livestock. Aaliyah joined them next, her hair uncombed, and her mouth still swollen from last night's roughness. She leaned, her head against Lucilla's shoulder, saying nothing. In these hours before clients, there was no pretense, no painted smiles or fake giggles, no sultry glances. They were just women, worn and weary, each carrying the weight of 1,000 performed pleasures. The silence was soon interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps, low, deliberate, echoing off the stone like a drumbeat. They all turned toward the entrance. It wasn't a client. Clients did not come this early. When the door creaked open, a young boy stood there, no older than 12, with curly hair and a tunic too large for his frame. In his hands was a sealed scroll. "Message for Lucilla," he said, pronouncing her name with careful precision, as if he'd rehearsed. Lucilla stood cautiously. "From who?" The boy shrugged. "I was paid not to ask." She took the scroll and unsealed it, half expecting some cruel joke or an insult scrawled by a former patron. But instead, the handwriting was elegant, practiced, and unfamiliar. "To the woman who watches the sea from behind walls, I read your words and dreamed of places I have never seen. If you will write again, leave the tablet at the Temple of Fortuna. Ask no questions, sign nothing, just write." There was no name, no indication of identity. Paula peered over her shoulder. "A lover," she teased, then frowned. "Or a trick." Lucilla said nothing, but the scroll trembled slightly in her hand. She knew Drosus hadn't sent it. He didn't have the funds, and besides, his hands shook too much for such neat lettering. That meant someone had read the tablet. Someone had believed the lie. And stranger still, someone had replied. That night, after the last client stumbled off, and the corridors again smelled of sweat and stale incense, Lucilla returned to the back room. Drosus was not there. Only the faint warmth of a recently extinguished lamp remained. She found a blank tablet and began to write. This time, she was more careful. Her words did not drip with longing, but with distant descriptions of fictional gardens, invented suns, and the salt wind that never blew through Pompeii. When she was done, she wrapped it in cloth and smuggled it beneath her shawl. At dawn, she visited the Temple of Fortuna, pretending to offer a prayer. She left the package tucked behind a pillar near the altar, heart pounding. For days, nothing came. Life in the Lupanar continued its tedious rhythm, drunken brawls, infected cuts, the old Roman merchant who cried during sex, and the German soldier who tried to pay with counterfeit coins. But every morning Lucilla checked the temple, and on the 5th day, she found another scroll. You wrote of lemon trees. I imagined the scent followed me all day. I do not know who you are, and I will not ask, but I am grateful. That was all. Simple, unadorned, but it bloomed inside her like something wild. This exchange became their secret ritual. She wrote of imagined journeys, sailing to Cyprus, visiting Delphi, drinking honeyed wine in the gardens of Syracuse. The mystery correspondent responded with quiet wonder, never asking for truths, never offering any. It became her tether to something beyond flesh and coin, beyond walls and moaning men. The other women began to notice the change. Lucilla was humming again, eating more, sleeping less. Aaliyah teased her, calling her the priestess of pen and lies. Even Crassus, in his brutish way, noticed. You're more sparkly lately, he said one evening, squinting at her as if she were some broken thing that had started working again. But not all change goes unnoticed in peace. One of the new girls, Tertia, barely 15, and already hardened by hunger, grew curious. She followed Lucilla one morning and watched her place a letter behind the temple pillar. That evening, Tertia confronted her, voice sharp with accusation. You've got a lover, don't you? A rich one, planning to leave us behind. Lucilla tried to deny it, but the seed had been planted. Rumors spread fast in the Lupanar, faster than disease. Heard of it within the day, and dragged Lucilla into the main chamber before the others. If you're hoarding favors, he snarled, you're stealing from me. She insisted she had nothing, no coins, no promises, no plans. But Crassus, ever paranoid, ordered Drosus to search her room. He found the hidden letters. One by one they were read aloud, mocked, dismissed as girlish fantasy. The illusion shattered under laughter. Lucilla stood frozen, hands clenched. When they laughed at the sea, they weren't just mocking her words, they were mocking the only thing that had made her feel human in years. Crassus burned the letters in a small bronze bowl, the smoke curling like dead vines. No more lies, he said. You're here, be here. That night, Lucilla did not return to her room. She went to the temple again, risking punishment. She left no letter, only a single olive blossom, dried and wrapped in linen. A symbol of peace or surrender. The next day, no scroll waited for her. Nor the next, nor the next. Whatever fragile thread had connected her to the invisible voice was broken. But something in her had shifted permanently. She returned to the brothel and performed her duties, but with a quiet detachment. She no longer waited for morning. She no longer whispered into the dark. But sometimes, just before sleep, she would trace the ghost of a lemon tree on the wall with her finger and pretend the room smelled of citrus. It didn't. It never had. But she remembered the words. I imagined the scent followed me all day. In a world where hope was a luxury, imagination had been her rebellion. And though they had taken the letters, they had not taken the dreams they contained. They could never touch those. Not even Vesuvius, which still slumbered beyond the horizon, could erase what had only ever lived in the mind. By the time the faint orange haze of early dawn began creeping over the terracotta rooftops of Pompeii, the air inside the Lupanar had turned thick and stifling, the scent of oil lamps, sweat, perfume, and despair woven together in a heavy curtain that settled on every surface like invisible dust. Lucilla stirred awake with a start. Not from any noise, but from the silence, the kind that comes only after too many sounds have finally collapsed into exhaustion. Her limbs ached from the awkward angles she'd twisted into to avoid the worst, of the straw poking up from the thin cot. Beside her pillow, the The wax tablet still rested, untouched since the night before. Its surface now faintly smudged from the humidity, but the words still clung stubbornly to the grooves, her false letter, still intact. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. She remembered every word Drosis had written. There was something about seagulls wheeling through a clear sky and the gentle lapping of waves against marble columns. It wasn't the details that mattered, but the feeling softness, space, a life without sharp edges. She sat up slowly, brushing grit from her arms, and began the ritual of preparing herself for another day. There were no mirrors in the brothel, not real ones at least, only polished bronze that gave back a hazy reflection, as if the building itself agreed that its inhabitants should not look too closely. Lucilla used it anyway, smoothing down her hair, pinching color into her cheeks, and tugging at the neckline of her tunic to make it appear a little newer, a little less lived in. Outside her door, the lupiner was already beginning to stir. Aaliyah was at the water basin, scrubbing her face with the tenacity of someone trying to erase more than dirt. Julia passed by, yawning so wide it looked painful, clutching a dried fig in one hand and an amphora of watered wine in the other. In the main chamber, the wooden shutters had been thrown open, letting in light that painted the frescoes with a strange glow, their erotic scenes momentarily transformed into something almost sacred in the golden hue. Flavia, the brothel's stern matron and part-time enforcer, stood near the doorway tallying coins on a small abacus. Her eyes flicked up as Lucilla entered. "You've got the merchant again," she said without preamble. "The one with the beard who smells of cumin." Lucilla nodded without emotion. The merchant was harmless, if overly fond of talking about his spice inventory medact. She could tolerate him. Flavia handed her a small cloth pouch. "Wash. You look like a ghost." There was no cruelty in her voice, only tired practicality. Lucilla obeyed, dipping the cloth into the basin and scrubbing the back of her neck. The insides of her elbows, behind her knees, every place where sweat and memory lingered too long. As she worked, she caught sight of Agrippina kneeling near the wall, whispering to a small figurine of Venus she had hidden inside a broken niche. No one mocked her for it. Everyone in the lupanar had their private madness. That day, the hours blurred. Clients came and went, some loud and obnoxious, others eerily silent, like shadows that moved with purpose but no voice. Lucilla found herself disconnecting, watching her own body from a distance, her voice reciting practiced moans, while her mind drifted somewhere far beyond the cracked plaster and flickering torchlight. In one of the smaller rooms, she noticed the graffiti had changed. Someone had etched a new phrase beside a crude drawing of two figures locked in embrace. It read, "Love is paid for in silence." She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. During a brief lull, she returned to Drosis, who sat near the back again, meticulously copying inventory records for Flavia. "Another letter?" he asked, without looking up. "No," she said. "Just company." He nodded and moved aside, offering her a corner of the bench. They didn't speak. There was comfort in the quiet, the shared knowledge of having seen too much and survived anyway. As twilight approached, bringing with it the drunken laughter of men stumbling toward pleasure and forgetfulness, a new figure entered the loop. He was older than most of the regulars, cloaked in a deep blue toga, his face clean-shaven and strangely somber. Lucilla saw him pause near the entrance, scanning the room not with hunger but with uncertainty, as if unsure what he was doing there. Flavia approached, ever the hawk, and after a few brief words, gestured toward Lucilla. The man approached her slowly, his sandals soundless against the floor. "Lucilla," he asked, his voice low. She stiffened. That wasn't a client's voice, it was too gentle, too real. "Who's asking?" "My name is Varro. I knew your father. In Rome, he used to talk about you." Lucilla froze. Her body reacted before her mind did, standing, backing away, heart pounding. "My father's dead," she whispered. "Yes, I know. I was with him when he passed." The room seemed to tilt slightly. She sat down before she could fall. Varro did not sit beside her. He knelt, as if honoring a grave. "He never stopped looking for you. After the rebellion, After you were taken, he tried to buy you back. But the records were gone. You were disappeared. Lucilla's mouth went dry. Why now? I found a letter, one of his hidden in a book. It had your name. I traced the brothel registry. Why? She asked again, more bitterly this time. You came to save me. Like some tragic verse. He shook his head. I came because I owed him the truth, and maybe to offer you a choice. Silence stretched between them. She could hear the others. Behind Herpula, laughing too loudly. Aaliyah breaking into song, a man grunting somewhere down the hall. The normal sounds of their unnormal life. I don't need your pity, she said at last. Then don't take it. Take the money I've brought. Use it however you want. Leave, if that's what you choose. Or stay, but let the choice be yours. Again, she stared at him. In his hand, he held a purse heavier than any she'd seen in months. And in his eyes no lust, no pity, only memory and regret. If I go, she said slowly, who do I become? Whoever you want, he answered. Lucilla, the potter's daughter. Or the senator's wife, from your letter. Or no one, just free. Drosis, who had listened without interrupting, finally spoke. You'll need a name, he said, for the road. Lucilla turned to him. Then write me one. He smiled faintly and dipped his stylus again. The name he wrote was short, unfamiliar, but it shimmered on the wax like prophecy. She took the tablet, stood, and looked around the lupanar one final time. It would continue without her its painted gods, its aching laughter, its whispered lies it always had. But for her, the story was changing. The wax tablet in her hand was still warm. Outside, the mountain brooded in silence, but Lucilla walked toward the door, not looking back. The city would not remember her, but perhaps she could remember herself. It was late summer in Pompeii, and the heat that had clung to the city walls all day now curled itself into the narrow alleys like a sleeping serpent. The sky above the lupanar was bruised purple, fading slowly into the black velvet of approaching night, and within the brothel's worn stone walls, a strange silence had taken root. It wasn't the usual hush of exhausted bodies and stale wine, but something heavier. More solemn, though even the walls themselves knew something was changing. Lucilla sat alone in the courtyard behind the lupanar, a rare space of cracked tiles and wilting ivy where the sun had once dared to touch. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and her hair, unbound for the first time in days, fell in wild curls over her shoulders. She was not waiting for a client. She was waiting for a sound, any sound that would pull her back into the rhythm of the world she knew. But none came. Inside, the girls were quiet. Julia had not sung all day. Aaliyah had not laughed. Even Paula, who usually barked orders and insults in the same breath, had spent the morning curled in her cot, muttering prayers to gods she no longer believed in. There had been tremors that week. Small ones, yes, but strange. The kind that made the oil in lamps ripple and the dogs whimper long before anyone else noticed. And now the silence felt like a warning, thick and absolute. Lucilla didn't know fear the way she had as a child. Back then, fear had been men's voices shouting from alleyways, or the sound of coins being counted outside her door. Now, fear was slower. It was a stillness that refused to be comforted, a sense that the world was about to tilt, and nothing could hold it steady. A creak broke, the silence a door opening, and Lucilla turned to see Drosis emerging from the interior hallway, his robes hanging like wet parchment around his bony frame. He held a scroll in his hand, old and frayed, and looked at her with an expression somewhere between amusement and regret. They say, the earth shook again last night, he said, his voice barely louder than the chirping cicadas. Lucilla nodded. I felt it. He sat beside her without asking, and for a while, they said nothing. The scroll unrolled gently between them, revealing lines of Greek poetry that Lucilla could not read but recognized by shape. It's a hymn, Drosis offered. To Demeter. I used to recite it to my students in Athens, before. She watched his fingers trace the letters, slow and reverent, and felt the absurd urge to memorize the curve of each one. Do you think the gods are angry? She asked quietly. Drosis smiled without joy. I think the gods are indifferent. It's men who twist the world into punishment and reward. That night, no clients came. Perhaps they were drunk elsewhere, or perhaps they too had sensed the tremors in more than just the stones beneath their sandals. The brothel stood still, like a temple abandoned mid-prayer. The women lay restless in their rooms, each pretending not to listen for the rumble that might come again. When the moon reached its height, Lucilla rose from her cot and tiptoed into the main hall. Aaliyah was already there, standing beneath the faded fresco of Venus that adorned the wall. The goddess's eyes had long since flaked away, leaving her blind and strange. "Can't sleep?" Lucilla asked. Aaliyah didn't answer, just pointed at the wall. "Do you think she sees us?" Lucilla followed her gaze. "She doesn't have eyes. But do you think she sees us anyway?" Lucilla considered this. Maybe she sees what we pretend to be. They stood in silence for a while. Two figures dwarfed by the painted image of beauty that had outlasted every woman who'd ever worked beneath it. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sulfur and sea. In the distance, the mountain loomed, its outline just visible against the starlit sky, and something about its stillness now felt unnatural. Drosis joined them minutes later, carrying a lamp and a jug of water. "It's going to rain tomorrow," he said. Aaliyah blinked. "It never rains this time of year." "And yet," he said, pouring water into a chipped cup and handing it to her. They passed the jug around, like a sacrament, drinking in the quiet as much as the water. Eventually, Paula emerged, her face red from sleep, and sat heavily on the stone bench without a word. Julia followed, hair disheveled and eyes wide. One by one, they gathered in the hall, drawn by the silence, by something they could not name. Drosis lit more lamps, and soon the room glowed with a warm, flickering light that softened even the harshest lines of their tired faces. "Tell us a story," Julia said suddenly, her voice thin. "A real one, not one about gods." Drosis tilted his head. "All stories are about gods, in the end." "Then tell one about a woman," Lucilla said. "One who didn't need gods to survive." And so he did. He told them the story of Hypatia, the philosopher of Alexandria, who taught in public, and defied men with her mind. He spoke of her courage, her intellect, her tragic death at the hands of a mob who feared her wisdom more than any sword. The women listened in silence, the only sound the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. Above them, when he finished, no one applauded, no one spoke. But something had shifted. For a moment, they were not prostitutes or forgotten girls. They were listeners of history, heirs to a legacy of women who dared to live with purpose. The lamps flickered, as a breeze swept through the room, and they huddled closer. "If the ground shakes again," Aaliyah whispered, "I want to be with you all. I don't want to die alone." "You won't," Lucilla said. "None of us will." They stayed there until the sky began to lighten, the first gray threads of dawn weaving themselves into the darkness. Outside, the city stirred. Merchants began setting up stalls, unaware of the quiet revolution that had occurred within the Lupaner. Lucilla walked to the courtyard and looked toward the mountain. It stood still, silent, but the air around it pulsed with a tension that was almost alive. She didn't know what was coming. None of them did. But she knew that, whatever it was, they would face it together, not as strangers or survivors of cruelty, but as something closer to a family, forged not by blood, but by the simple, stubborn act of enduring. Behind her, the others began to laugh. Real laughter, not the painted kind they wore for clients. It rose like smoke, sweet and defiant, into the morning air. By the time dawn began to tease the rim of the horizon with its hesitant glow, the Lupaner had already settled into the quiet hum of aftermath. That peculiar silence which falls over places where night has spent all its fire, and day has not yet claimed its due. The oil lamps, now sputtering on their last gulps of fuel, threw elongated shadows across the stone floor, making the narrow corridors appear deeper than they were, like tunnels burrowing into the bones of the city. In one of these rooms, hidden behind a threadbare curtain that once bore the embroidered symbol of Venus but now looked more like a stain, Lucilla lay still, not asleep, not entirely awake, just drifting in the space between, that gray mental corridor where the body remembers exhaustion, but the mind won't let go. The wax tablet Drosis had written on remained beneath her straw mattress, warmed by her body's weight. She hadn't read the words, not really, but she had memorized the shape of the letters from the way he carved them, deliberate, slow, kind, as though even false hope deserved respect. Elsewhere in the lupanar, Paula was arguing in her sleep, her voice sharp and wounded, repeating a name no one had heard her speak while conscious. Julia, wrapped in a blanket too thin for the chill, held onto a small terracotta figurine, chipped and ancient, something she claimed had once belonged to her mother. Aaliyah had already risen and was cleaning the little shared wash basin with a rag that smelled faintly of vinegar and ash. The water was cold, and it bit at her skin, but she welcomed the pain. It was real, at least unlike the smile she wore. For clients, the matron, old Livia, was in the front chamber reviewing the accounts, her lips moving silently as her fingers traced over columns of numbers that didn't quite add up, never did, never would. She looked up as Drosis entered, his breath visible in the cold air. "You're early," she said. "Didn't sleep," he replied, rubbing his hands together. "Did you finish the copy for the magistrate's record?" she asked. "I did," he said, "but I doubt he'll read it. Men like him ask for words, the way others ask for flowers, decorative, forgettable." Livia grunted and returned to her figures. Drosis didn't sit. He hovered near the entrance like a man not sure whether he belonged in or out. His eyes scanned the graffiti-covered walls, pausing briefly on a new message someone had scratched in overnight. "Love costs nothing until it does." No one claimed it, but it had the rhythm of truth. Outside, the city of Pompeii yawned and stretched. Vendors rolled open their stalls in the Masalum, brushing frost from figs and arranging olives into neat pyramids. Fishermen returned with their night's catch, the smell of salt and blood clinging to their clothes. Bakers lit their ovens, and the scent of rising bread began to drift through the streets like a promise. But within the lupanar, time moved differently. The women prepared themselves, not for a new day, but for the next cycle of performance. Aaliyah applied a touch of pigment to her cheeks, using crushed rose petals she kept wrapped in linen. Paula soaked her feet in cold water to ease the swelling from a night of standing. Julia stood before a broken shard of mirror and practiced a smile that looked casual, but not too eager. Lucilla remained lying down, her eyes fixed on the ceiling where a spider had spun a new web overnight. She watched it glisten in the low light, admired its craftsmanship, envied its solitude. Then, with a sigh, she rose, washed, dressed, and tucked the tablet into a wooden box she kept beneath her cot. A box containing exactly 3 things: a bronze hairpin, a coin with Caesar Augustus's profile worn nearly smooth, and a letter that was never meant to be sent. As the morning wore on, a knock came at the door, not the erratic pounding of a drunk, nor the nervous tap of a shy boy seeking thrills, but a polite, deliberate knock. Livia opened it to find a woman standing there, cloaked in fine wool dyed Tyrian purple. Her shoes were soft, her hands manicured, and her eyes sharp. "I need a message carried," she said. Livia stepped aside, confused. "We don't usually handle to Rome," the woman added, cutting her off. "I heard your scribe is good." Drosis stepped forward. "I can write it," he said, "but I don't carry." The woman nodded. "It will be collected." She produced a small scroll already marked with seals and handed him a note with instructions. Her perfume lingered long after she left, a strange blend of jasmine and crushed myrrh. Drosis stared at the scroll, then looked at Livia. "Interesting. Friends you have," he said. She only shrugged. "The city's full of secrets." By noon the lupanar resumed its rhythm. Men came and went, some shy, some boastful, some silent, some cruel. Aaliyah danced for a man who never once looked her in the eyes. Paula entertained a pair of sailors who kept mispronouncing her name. Julia received a gift, a necklace of blue glass beads from a merchant who swore he'd return in a week. He wouldn't. And Lucilla met with a regular, an older man, who always asked her to read poetry aloud while he listened with eyes closed. She didn't mind him. He paid in coin and silence. But that afternoon, something unusual happened. After he left, He forgot his ring, a heavy gold band, etched with a lion's head. Lucilla stared at it, then slipped it into her palm and closed her fingers tightly. She didn't return it. That evening, after the sun had slipped behind Vesuvius and the city exhaled again into darkness, she took the ring to Drosus. "Melt it," she said. "Trade it, buy wine, buy silence." He looked at her, eyes narrow. "It's valuable." "So am I," she replied, and turned to go. In the hallway, she passed Julia, who was humming again. "You look taller," Julia said. "Did something change?" Lucilla smiled, just a little. "Maybe I remembered who I was." And that night, as the lupanar descended again into its murky world of flickering oil light and whispered transactions, a spider wove another thread across the ceiling, its web glinting like silver. Outside, the sky remained quiet. The mountain, ever patient, bided its time. But inside, beneath layers of routine and pain, a few women dared to imagine something different. Not freedom, perhaps, but the possibility of it, like a ring hidden in the folds of a cloak, like a lie written gently, in wax, like a name spoken aloud, only in dreams. And dreams, in places like this, were the most rebellious acts of all. By the time the sun rose over Pompeii, casting long streaks of light across the tiled rooftops and the cracked pavement of narrow streets, the lupanar had begun to transform once more, shedding the echoes of night like a snake shedding its skin. The scent of wine, sweat, and old perfume clung to the walls, but in the early hours, there was a strange kind of stillness, a calm before the rhythm of the city surged back to life. Aaliyah, who had barely slept, sat with her back against the stone wall just outside the brothel's doorway. Her legs drawn to her chest and her eyes half-lidded, not fully awake, not quite dreaming. She watched the passers-by with the blank stare, vendors setting up stalls, boys chasing each other with sticks, and respectable matrons hurrying past with their heads turned away, pretending the lupanar was just another doorway with nothing inside. Aaliyah reached for the cup of watered-down wine left over from the night and sipped slowly, ignoring the sting in her stomach that reminded her she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Inside, Julia was brushing her hair with a broken comb, yanking the knots out with practiced indifference, while Lucilla tended to a scrape on her foot that had opened again from pacing too much on the uneven floor. Drosus had already left, having exchanged his services the night before for a piece of bread and a corner by the kitchen hearth. No one said goodbye. No one ever did. Paula was the last to rise, groaning as she rolled from her cot and shuffled toward the wash basin with the weariness of someone who had danced too long on sore feet. The water was stale, but it was cold, and she splashed it on her face anyway, blinking as if waking from a dream she couldn't quite remember. The brothel owner, a man named Calvus, arrived not long after, as he always did, just late enough to avoid the worst of the cleanup, but early enough to count the coins collected in the bowl by the entrance. He was a man of few words and fewer sympathies. His tunic stained with oil, and his sandals worn down from years of walking the same routes between brothel, bakery, and betting house. He grunted when he entered, sniffed the air, and made a note to replace the incense burner that had gone out the night before. Without looking at the women, he began tallying the earnings, muttering under his breath as he sorted coins by weight and origin. Aaliyah watched him, not with fear or hatred, but with the hollow numbness of someone who had accepted the rules of her cage a long time ago. Calvus wasn't cruel, at least not in the flamboyant way of sadistic men. He didn't beat them, rarely raised his voice, and never laid a hand on the women unless it was to remove one from his path. But his apathy was its own kind of violenza, slow erosion of identity, a reminder that they were numbers first, names second. Occasionally, he would joke with a client, praise a girl's performance like one might compliment a mule's speed, or tell stories of his youth when he had once considered being a sailor. But mostly, he was just there, the way mildew was there, or rust, or the slow rot of wood no one bothers to repair. As the day grew warmer, the lupanar, prepared for its other, faced the daytime illusion of respectability. Sheets were changed, incense was lit, and fruit was set out near the entrance to suggest some sense of hospitality. Aaliyah helped Lucilla sweep the floors, neither of them speaking, each lost in thoughts they no longer shared. In the corner, Julia was sewing a tear in her tunic, muttering curses every time the thread tangled. Outside, the sounds of the city were rising. The calls of fishmongers, the barking of dogs, the clatter of carts. And then, as if summoned by some invisible cue, the first client of the day appeared, a senator's clerk, with ink-stained fingers and a look of practiced nonchalance. He nodded at Calvis, who nodded back, and chose Julia with the ease of someone picking a favorite cut of meat. Julia stood, smoothed her tunic, and followed him into one of the rooms without a word. No one watched. No one needed to. This was the rhythm of their days now, a cycle as predictable as the tides. Wake, clean, serve, sleep. Though even sleep came rarely and never whole. Later, when the sun was high and the rooms had grown sticky with heat, Lucilla found herself sitting by the doorway where Aaliyah had been earlier. Aaliyah was gone now, called away by another client, and Lucilla stared out at the street with a strange tightness in her chest. She remembered a time, long ago, when she too had walked past this place pretending it didn't exist. Her hand tucked into her mother's, her eyes wide with the wonder of city life. Pompeii had seemed enormous then, a place of possibilities. Now it was just a labyrinth, and she was always walking in circles. As she sat, a boy ran past, barefoot, laughing, chased by a friend who wielded a stick like a sword. They disappeared around the corner, and for a moment, Lucilla smiled. But the smile faded quickly, replaced by a look of deep exhaustion. She stood and returned inside, back to the shadowed corridors and the quiet rooms where dreams went to die. That evening, when the lamps were lit once more and the first stars began to pierce the sky, the Lupena transformed again. Voices grew louder, laughter more forced, perfume more pungent. The night clients came differently than the day. One's more wine, more roughness, more secrets. One man came in smelling of ash and whispered that the mountain looked strange, that morning, smoke curling from its top in thin spirals. Lucilla heard him but said nothing. The mountain always smoked. It was just a mountain. She had bigger things to worry about, like whether her heel would bleed through the new sandals Calvis had brought, or if the senator who sometimes chose her would come back with another girl on his arm. In the far room, Aaliyah lay with a client, who asked to be called father, his breath thick with wine and regret. She stared at the ceiling while he spoke, not listening, just counting the cracks again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then she lost track and started over. When he left, he placed a single coin on the floor instead of in the bowl. She waited until the door shut before crawling to retrieve it, her face blank. And outside, in the darkness, just beyond the reach of torchlight, the city of Pompeii held its breath. No one knew it, but it was the last time the Lupanor would ever see that particular dusk. The earth beneath them shifted slightly, imperceptibly, a tremor that felt like a sigh. Inside, the women prepared for another long night. Outside, the mountain watched in silence,